Officer Edwards, says we're police. Do you know why we're stopping you today?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a hold of this guy I'm following him.
Why are you following him?
He's been living out of his life, and I've been trying to talk to him about it. He's going to kill her, and he has told her that he will put her in the cistern under the house.
On January 27th, the Hillsborough Police Department is alerted to a deceased body in the parking garage on the Intel campus. Intel, they're very on top of security issues. So for there to be a body that's deceased in a car was a surprise to me.
Every 11 minutes in America, a stalking victim seeks a protective order. Right now, as you begin this video, 3 more people are walking into courthouses, clutching evidence of harassment, threats, GPS trackers hidden under their cars. They believe a judge's signature on legal paper will save their lives. For Kenneth Fandrich, that belief proved fatal. On January 27, 2023, Kenny, a 56-year-old pipe fitter contractor at Intel's Hillsborough campus, walked into work for the last time. By evening, he'd be dead in his black Honda, staged to look like natural causes, murdered by the very man the court had ordered to stay away. This was a systemic collapse, a case where every protective mechanism, from the legal penalty to the enforcement response, became a blueprint for murder. What I'm about to show you exposes a chilling truth. Protective orders don't protect when the system treats stalking as a nuisance rather than a prelude to homicide. And the evidence trail, from spray-painted cameras to burner vehicles purchased under fake names, reveals a killer who understood exactly how to exploit those gaps. If you're watching because you want to understand how justice systems fail, subscribe now. Because what Kenny's family discovered will fundamentally change how you view stalking laws in America. Kenneth Carl Fandrich wasn't supposed to die in a parking garage. He was born in 1967 to Judy and Frank Fandrich in Oregon, where he grew up alongside his brothers, Lance and Richard, known for lighting up rooms with his easy humor and warmth. After high school, he moved to Alaska, where he built a successful business before returning home to Oregon for a fresh start. By 2023, he had secured a contractor position at Intel's Gordon Moore Park facility in Hillsborough, steady, reliable work for a man who loved the outdoors. Whether he was installing pipes, hunting, fishing, snowboarding, or just relaxing in his backyard with friends and his dogs, Kenny lived simply and fully. He sent his mom a text every morning, always did, and that small routine mattered. Yet beneath that steady rhythm of ordinary life, a shadow lingered, one that refused to disappear. That shadow was Dr. Stephen Milner, a wealthy Oregon City veterinarian worth millions. Milner wasn't some random stalker or stranger. He was Kenny's wife's former boss and former lover. Tanya Fandrich had worked as a veterinary technician at Milner's clinic for 19 years. In early 2017, when her marriage to Kenny hit rough waters and Milner was separated from his own wife, an affair began. He even gave Tanya a secret name, Kiki. To clients, nothing seemed amiss. Their interactions remained professional, calm, and composed. But behind the clinic doors, a private relationship was forming, one that would later spiral into obsession and end in tragedy. When Kenny discovered the affair in 2021, Tanya ended it immediately, hoping to close that chapter and move forward. Yet what should have been the end was, in truth, only the beginning. Milner couldn't accept the breakup. Instead, he began what prosecutors would later describe as a psychotic campaign intended to threaten, intimidate, frighten, and harass. Home surveillance cameras eventually captured him sneaking onto the Fandrich property, and GPS tracking devices, more than one, were found attached to both Kenny's and Tanya's vehicles. Kenny would drive to work and, more often than not, spot Milner's car in his rearview mirror, following him mile after mile. On March 1, 2022, court documents reveal Milner followed Kenny from Oregon City to a gas station and allegedly threatened to cut his body into pieces. 10 months before the murder, Kenny called the police again after Milner tailed him for 4 to 5 minutes from Oregon City to Hillsborough, a deliberate, calculated pursuit. When Officer Edwards finally pulled Milner over, the body camera footage captured an exchange that stunned investigators.
Hi, Officer Edwards, Hillsborough Police. Do you know why we're stopping you today?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a hold of this guy I'm following him.
Why are you following him?
He's been living out of his life, and I've been trying to talk to him about it. He's going to kill her, and he has told her that he will put her in the cistern under the house.
Officer Edwards asked, "Do you know why we're stopping you today?" Milner calmly replied, "Yeah, I'm trying to get a hold of this guy that I'm following him." He didn't deny it. He admitted it on camera. That's how emboldened he'd become. By March 2022, Kenny had secured a stalking protective order against Milner. And by September, he had filed a $245,000 harassment lawsuit detailing years of terror, trespassing in the middle of the night, attaching GPS devices, issuing death threats. That same month, Milner was criminally charged in Clackamas County for placing yet another tracking device. The courts kept issuing orders, but Milner kept violating them. In total, prosecutors would later document 7 violations of the Stalking Protective Order between November 2022 and January 2023. Kenny did everything right. He called police, obtained protective orders, filed lawsuits, and documented every incident. Yet the system that promised him protection kept failing, layer after layer. It told him over and over, "You're protected now." But the system was wrong. By mid-afternoon on December 13th, 2022, Intel surveillance cameras captured a man in disguise entering the Ronla Acres parking structure. Hard hat, tinted safety glasses, face mask, gloves. He moved methodically through the garage with a can of blue spray paint, targeting the cameras near the space where Kenny habitually parked. This wasn't a murder. This was a test. Milner was checking Intel's security response time. How long before someone noticed? Would alarms sound? And would God investigate? When nothing happened, he had his answer. He could operate freely. Over the next 6 weeks, surveillance showed Milner returning repeatedly, watching Kenny's patterns like a predator memoizing prey migration. What time Kenny arrived, when he left, which parking space he chose, how long he stayed, Milner was building a behavioral profile with clinical precision. By early January 2023, Milner purchased a second vehicle, a maroon Dodge minivan, using a false identity. Investigators would later call these burner cars untraceable disposable vehicles much like burner phones. He had already acquired one vehicle on Craigslist in October 2022 for covert surveillance, and now he had 2. Both vehicles appeared on Home Depot parking lot surveillance footage, abandoned for long periods, as Milner staged his assets. On the morning of January 27, 2023, while most of Hillsborough slept, Milner entered the Intel parking structure in his Feist vehicle. He waited for Kenny to arrive at his usual time, park in his usual spot, and walk into the facility. Once Kenny disappeared through the entrance doors, Milner moved. At 5:19 a.m., he spray-painted every security camera with sight lines to Kenny's black Honda. Blue paint again, the same brand, the same technique practiced in December, but he didn't cover everything. The paint obscured angles, yet it didn't eliminate all coverage, which would later be his undoing. Minutes later, he left in his first vehicle, only to return in the maroon minivan and park directly next to Kenny's Honda, waiting inside. For the next 11 hours, Milner sat in that van, waiting. No bathroom breaks captured on camera. No movement. Just waiting for Kenny's shift to end. By late afternoon, Kenny walked out of Intel after a normal Friday workday. He had weekend plans, maybe fishing, maybe snowboarding, maybe just grilling in the backyard with Tanya and the dogs. He reached his Honda and pressed his key fob. The headlights flashed as the doors unlocked. That's when Milner struck. Detectives reviewing the footage later saw Kenny's car lights flash wildly, frantically, as if someone were desperately pushing the panic button. Detective Devin Rigo described it. "You see a lot of movement happening all of a sudden. A lot of lights." That's Kenny desperately pushing his key fob as the masked man dragged him into that maroon van. Inside the minivan, Milner put Kenny in a chokehold. Blunt compression trauma to the neck, the autopsy would confirm. Kenny fought, his hands grabbing at his attacker and collecting skin cells under his nails, leaving Milner's DNA on his palms. Yet Milner had the element of surprise, the physical advantage, and months of planning behind him. Kenny Fandrich died in that van, his neck and spine shattered. Minutes later, Milner dragged Kenny's body back to the Honda, positioning him in the driver's seat and arranging his belongings, coffee cup, work bag, phone, to make it appear he had simply died of natural causes. A heart attack, maybe stress, anything but murder. Then Milner drove the maroon minivan out of the garage, disappearing into Portland rush hour traffic. When Kenny didn't come home, Tanya called Intel Security. They found him slumped in his car, looking for all the world like he had just fallen asleep and never woken up. But the autopsy told a different story. The injuries were catastrophic and unmistakably homicide. By the evening of January 27, 2023, Hillsborough Police Detective Devin Rigo arrived at the scene within an hour. Intel security team immediately provided access to hundreds of surveillance cameras throughout the parking structure. What Rigo saw stunned him. The spray paint hadn't worked. The blue paint obscured direct views, yet angles Milner hadn't considered captured everything. The disguised figure, the spray painting, the maroon minivan parking next to Kenny's Honda, the frantic flashing lights, and the minivan leaving. He knew immediately this was premeditated murder, not a random attack. Later that night, detectives interviewed Tanya at her home, and within minutes she gave them a name, Dr. Stephen Milner. She explained the affair, the stalking, the protective orders, and the tracking devices. She showed court documents, provided Milner's address, his clinic information, and details of his vehicles. This wasn't a mystery. This was a suspect gift wrap with a paper trail. Over the next 3 days, detectives traced a maroon minivan through its VIN, sending flyers to every police agency in the region. If you see this vehicle, do not approach. Call Hillsborough PD immediately. The first alert came from the Oregon Department of Transportation. The minivan had been towed from the side of I-5 highway in North Portland just days after the murder. Milner had dumped it there, likely driving it straight from the murder scene to the interstate. Rigo called the tow company, and his stomach dropped. "Sir, we sold that vehicle to a scrap metal company last week." On January 31st, Detective Rigo and his partner Stephanie Winter raced to a junkyard north of Portland. An employee showed surveillance footage from the scrapyard itself. Rigo watched in horror as metal jaws descended on the maroon minivan, the vehicle containing Kenny's blood, Milner's fingerprints, forensic evidence that could seal the case, and crushed it into a cube of scrap metal. The timestamp on the video, exactly 1 week earlier. "I was able to watch one of my key pieces of evidence be crushed and taken away," Rigo later told CBS's 48 Hours. "Before my very eyes, exactly a week too late. Every fiber, every blood drop, every trace of what happened inside that van during those 11 hours, gone, turned into recycled metal, likely already melted down into rebar or car parts. Even without the van, detectives had enough. They arrested Stephen Milner and charged him with second-degree murder, stalking, and 7 counts of violating the stalking protective order. Yet the prosecution knew they faced an uphill battle. The actual murder scene destroyed, the forensic gold mine obliterated. Then came the forensic miracle. DNA result from Kenny's hands arrived, and Rigo recalled opening the email. "Oh my gosh, this is it." Stephen Milner's DNA was on Kenneth Fandrich's hands. Not touch DNA, not transfer DNA, but direct contact DNA from a violent struggle. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychologist reviewing the evidence, explained, "What we see here is textbook organized offender behavior, meticulous planning, surveillance, burner vehicles, but with one critical mistake. He didn't account for the victim fighting back and collecting his DNA. That physical evidence became the cornerstone of the case." Dr. Stephen Neal Milner wasn't a stereotypical killer. He was a licensed veterinarian with a thriving Oregon City practice, and clients describe him as wonderful, compassionate, and the kind of vet who gets down on the floor with your dog. He'd even been featured in local news segments about his clinic. He was worth millions, and he owned his practice. But behind that practice, he also controlled an LLC that operated a marijuana farm in Beaver Creek, discovered only during asset investigations after his arrest. This was a man with resources, intelligence, and community standing. The kind of person judges hesitate to see as dangerous, the kind of defendant who testifies in his own defense and claims self-defense, expecting juries to believe him over evidence. Kenny obtained a stalking protective order in March 2022, 10 months before he was murdered, yet that order was violated 7 times between November 2022 and January 2023. 7 documented violations, GPS trackers, following Kenny to work, showing up at the house. What happened after each violation? Nothing that stopped Milner. In October 2022, he was criminally charged in Clackamas County for placing a tracking device, and he was released on conditional release with one condition: don't stalk the Fandrichs. He immediately bought a car on Craigslist to continue stalking more covertly. Former FBI profiler Marcus Webb, reviewing the case file, explained, "In my 23 years, I've seen this pattern repeatedly. Stalkers escalate when they realize the system has no teeth. Each violation without serious consequence teaches them, I can do this. The order is paper, and paper doesn't stop bullets, or in this case, hands around the throat." Kenny's attorney, Michael Fuller, put it bluntly at the wrongful death lawsuit hearing. This case highlights the limits of the system that is supposed to protect victims of stalking. Kenny did everything right, and the system failed him catastrophically. Here's the ugly truth. In Oregon, stalking is a Class A misdemeanor with a maximum penalty of 1 year in jail and $6,250 in fines. Only if a perpetrator has prior convictions or uses a weapon does it elevate to a Class C felony, which carries up to 5 years. Milner had been caught before, he'd been charged before, and he was out on conditional release when he murdered Kenny. Prosecutor John Gerhardt addressed the court during Milner's sentencing. As this court is well aware, there is no treatment for stalking behavior. His predatory behavior warrants this court assuring that he dies behind bars. But that sentiment came after Kenny was dead. Where was that urgency when Milner violated Order Number 3, Number 5, or Number 7? According to Oregon court documents, when stalking cases involve victims without intimate partner connections, enforcement becomes even more lax. Stalking protective orders, unlike domestic violence orders, can be issued regardless of prior relationship, a good policy on paper. But in practice, judges and law enforcement often don't grasp the lethality risk until it's too late. Deputy District Attorney Marlise Streblow said, "This case highlights a very worst-case scenario. Take stalking seriously. That shouldn't be a revelation. It should be the default." Stephen Milner was a wealthy, educated, white professional with no criminal history beyond stalking. He spoke calmly to police, and he hired good attorneys. When caught following Kenny in March 2022, he didn't run or resist. He talked his way through a traffic stop. Compare that to how stalking cases involving marginalized victims are treated. While Washington county-specific statistics are unavailable, national data shows stalking victims of color are less likely to have protective orders enforced, less likely to have violations prosecuted, and more likely to have their fears dismissed as overreaction. Milner's respectability became armor. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a heartbroken man unable to let go. That narrative, just a guy who can't move on, minimizes the danger until it's fatal. This isn't isolated. In the past decade, numerous stalking homicides nationwide followed the same pattern: multiple protective order violations, wealthy or professional perpetrators, law enforcement treating stalking as relationship drama, victims doing everything right, and systemic inaction until murder. Kenny Fandrich is now a statistic in a preventable tragedy category. Nearly 2 years after Kenny's murder, Stephen Milner went to trial in Washington County Circuit Court. He pleaded not guilty and testified in his own defense, claiming self-defense, that Kenny attacked him first, forcing him to fight back. The jury didn't believe him. Prosecutors presented the surveillance footage, the spray-painted cameras, the burner vehicles, the GPS trackers, the months of stalking, and the 7 protective order violations. They showed the timeline: 11 hours of waiting in a van, a deliberate ambush, a staged crime scene. And they had the DNA on Kenny's hands. On January 22, 2025, the jury found Stephen Neal Milner guilty of second-degree murder, stalking, and all 7 counts of violating the stalking protective order. Cameras were allowed in the courtroom for sentencing on February 18, 2025. Tanya Fandrich, who asked not to be shown, delivered a victim impact statement, and Prosecutor Streblow read her words. "All you had to do was stop. Hear me clearly when I say you are a vengeful, deceptive, manipulating, self-serving, aggressive, hateful, lying predator. and all you had to do was stop? Judge Eric Butcher sentenced Milner to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, and if it's ever granted parole, he'll serve an additional 6 years for the protective order violations. Prosecutor John Gerhard told the court, his predatory behavior warrants this court assuring that he dies behind bars. Now 58, Stephen Milner is incarcerated at Snake River Correctional Institution in Ontario, Oregon, and he did not respond to media requests for interviews. Tanya Fandrich continues to live in Oregon, though she has relocated for privacy, and she has become an advocate for stricter stalking law enforcement, working with legislators on bills that would make third violations of protective orders automatic felonies. Detective Devin Rigo still works at Hillsborough Police Department, and in interviews, he has spoken about the case's impact on how his department handles stalking complaints. Every violation now triggers immediate detective-level review rather than patrol officer warnings. Kenny's brothers, Lance and Richard Fandrich, established a memorial fund supporting stalking victim legal advocacy in Oregon, and they have testified before the state legislature 3 times since 2023. The maroon minivan that contained the murder scene was never recovered from scrap metal processing, and that evidence is gone forever, a haunting reminder how quickly critical forensics can disappear in the gaps between investigation and action. Intel Corporation upgraded security protocols at all Oregon campuses following Kenny's murder, including AI-powered anomaly detection that flags individuals repeatedly appearing in parking structures they don't work in. Kenny Fandrich's murder exposes a fundamental flaw in how America treats stalking. We issue protective orders as if they were magic spells, as if judicial signatures alone could create force fields around victims. They don't. A protective order is only a tool, and it only works when the system behind it has teeth, when violations are treated as serious crimes, and when judges and prosecutors understand that stalking isn't relationship drama. It's violence in slow motion, a prelude to murder in too many cases. According to the National Center for Victims of Crime, roughly 7.5 million people are stalked annually in the United States, and 1 in 5 stalking victims are stalked by someone with whom they have or had an intimate relationship. Here's a statistic that should terrify everyone. 76% of female homicide victims in intimate partner violence were stalked by their killers in the year before their deaths. Stalking is a threat assessment, but it is also a murder plan being drafted in real time, and we keep treating it like harassment until someone dies. For victims of stalking, there are 3 essential steps to survive. First, document everything with timestamps, not just "he followed me," but write precisely. On March 15, 2024, at 7:42 a.m., I observed, name, as vehicle, license plate, parked across from my workplace at address. At 5:15 p.m., the same vehicle followed me for 12 minutes to location. Screenshots, photos, witnesses. Build a thorough evidence file, because specificity matters. Second, report every violation immediately. Don't let fatigue or frustration stop you from reporting violation number 4 or 5, because each documented violation creates precedent, and you must insist on speaking with detectives, not just patrol officers, using the exact phrase, "I'm reporting a criminal violation of protective order, case number. This is a crime, and I need a case number for this report." Third, create a safety network. Tell your workplace security, your neighbors, and close friends about the protective order, and provide them with photos of the stalker and their vehicles. Stalkers rely on isolation, so don't give them that advantage. For advocates and allies, if someone tells you they are being stalked, believe them immediately and offer to accompany them to court hearings, help document evidence, or simply sit with them when they are scared, because stalking thrives in silence and isolation. For policy change, Kenny's family has partnered with Oregon legislators on the proposed Kenneth Fandrich Stalking Accountability Act legislation that would make the third violation of any protective order an automatic felony, require GPS monitoring for stalkers with multiple violations, create a centralized stalking violation database accessible to all law enforcement, and fund dedicated stalking investigation units in every county. This legislation is currently in committee. If you're in Oregon, contact your state representatives, and if you're elsewhere, check whether your state has similar proposals. Share this story, because statistically, someone watching right now knows a stalking victim and doesn't realize the danger they're in, or someone is currently being stalked and needs to know that what's happening has a name, a pattern, and legal remedies. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. But more importantly, if this case resonates with you, talk about what systemic changes could have saved Kenny's life. In remembering Kenneth Kenny Fandrich, the pipe fitter who loved snowboarding and sent his mom texts every morning, the husband who fought to protect his family, the man who did everything right and died anyway, we refuse to let his death become just another statistic in a broken system. We demand better, and we demand enforcement, because paper shields must become real protection. The next Kenny Fandrich is out there right now, walking to their car in a parking garage, believing a court order will keep them safe, and we owe them more than hope. We owe them a system that works.